Kept you waiting, huh?
Hello everybody. This was intended to be a short simple video to get the juice going type of build, but here we are. The base building is very simple and enjoyable for a single afternoon session, so let's go straight to interesting things. I decided to add some casting numbers to the hull. Carefully shave the numbers from the sprues with a fresh blade. And with extra thin cement glue and blend them in. Also, the kit lacks any tools. I had some spares around along PE brackets from Aber from a set of a King Tiger. The rest are sprue bits cut and shaped as needed. Fun fact, they can be made workable, useless but interesting. I glued the tools down so they don't move around. Also obviously added a very basic technique of cast and rolled steel textures. Now some Mr. Surfacer primer thinned down so details and textures don't clog. I changed the molded in hook points on the engine bay with wire along some of the handles. The ones on the cooling bay won't be changed as they are not seen. Now the base color with red primer from Ammo and let it cure a day. A layer of chipping fluid and let it dry. While it dries, I chose to use Gaia Notes lacquer in a very dark rusty tone straight on plastic. These paints are very sturdy and like them a lot but are hard to get outside of Japan at reasonable prices. For the base color I chose olive drab instead of the French green, which is darker and bluish. As for why I like it more, and had this paint laying around unused. An insight: in the middle of the humid heat of summer, using Vallejo acrylics wasn't the easiest choice as they are very finicky unlike lacquers which are foolproof. Airbrush thin layers. Now a generous layer of chipping fluid and let it dry. I will start the camouflage with a sand color turtle scheme. As I said before, humidity, heat and my careless handling aren't a good combination, but it's easy to fix. Once the paint cures with a 600 grit sponge stick, carefully sand the affected areas. Keep working until the surface is even and repaint. The second layer, following the earlier layer, is done at low pressure and with a fine tip precision airbrush. The third layer is like reeds and vines, and I found the brush is a fast way to create a guide. Use very thin down paint so you don't create ridges. Then with the fine tip airbrush finish the real shapes. See the work so far. My main idea for this scheme is to mimic branches, jungle vegetation and reeds. To make it like sunlight and shadows, with several depths. Also, the other main inspiration is the French lizard pattern, which saw widespread use in colonial deployments and was the inspiration for the iconic Vietnam War tiger stripe. So full circle, I guess. On the aesthetic front, this tank has some interesting shapes and lines with a voluptuous turret and a sleek hull, giving some elegant vibes and movement which favors such animalistic prints. Last camouflage color is AC Real Color NATO Black. It's a pleasure to airbrush without dramas in hot humid weather. Painted in little, long amoeba-like clouds. As this type of paint will not give me troubles, I just freehand it. The pattern is to cross against the earlier stripes to break a bit the shapes, but follow your heart and paint how it feels right. With a K third generation Waffen Brown, I give the wood handles a base coat. Not sponsored, but I quite liked these paints for brush painting and airbrush. Absolutely hated their figure line and deeply regret buying some sets from them on the earlier generation. Not sure if first or second, but they are horrible. These are working flawlessly. Also, their third generation thinner is excellent for vinyl acrylics. As for the weird brush, I got it as I thought it would be comfortable for details and indeed worked fine, so I recommend you try it at least if you struggle with precision with a brush. Either a quote real unquote brushes or the ones for nail art, which have several lengths and tips and are dirt cheap on AliExpress, so nothing lost. 2 thin base coats and let it dry. Then with new wood color and black we mix mid-tones, highlights and shadows. Apply them very watered down so when they dry is translucent. With the darker colors we fake shadows and create veins. Let it dry and keep working until pleased with the result. Here you can see the blue-green that is supposed to be the base color. I didn't like it much for this, but I'll use it to paint a common element like the extinguishers. Same as before, 2 thin layers. You can also add highlights and shadows to the cylinder, but I don't feel like doing cartoonish eye grabs here. Now these details are almost done. Painted the rear lights, which was a pain in the ass due shape, shallowness and size. Here you can see the color difference. I feel olive drab suits more the mood here, but it would be a valid choice the green-blue with some changes. Overall, for an impulse buy project and something I didn't think too much about, I'm very pleased with it so far. I mentioned replacing these before, but you can see it clearly here what I meant. The 2 in the back are covered, so no need to touch them, but I recommend using wire for the engine ones. To cover them I used 2 spare wheels. Bottom is unseen and flat, so easy to glue. They are left over from the kit. For the locking mechanism, some plastic from the sprues cut and sanded was used. The wing nut is the only thing along the spade and pickaxe not from the kit but from the spare sprues box. I think they are a logic addition and give some balance to the tank. Now back to the tracks, where I chose an aluminum color from Ammo, which was what I had laying around, and dry brushed them to a polished metal look. Also, the sprockets and idler wheels get their shine on with a pencil in this case for ease of application. This is duller than the aluminum tone, as this will be mostly left as is with lighter weathering, unlike the tracks which need some more contrast. As the kit is very sparse with decal options, as it never went past a prototype, I designed and printed my own. I tried this new decal paper I got back when I was living in Tokyo that was sitting around. Now I'll cut it off. The sheet can be reused several times, accounting for the position of the print. It's solid white for the numbers and opacity of the yellow emblem. The instructions mention to use this clear coat to seal the ink. With airbrush I apply a thin layer and let it cure a day. With a fresh blade and a ruler, ideally a metal one, but it is how it is, carefully cut the decals to shape. As the carrier film is one white sheet, be as clean as possible. Ideally, cut the round shapes with a swiveling blade, but with a regular one it can be done as seen. Also note, as I show here, that the base is semi-translucent, so take it into account for your projects. To apply them, just go ahead like with regular decals. They are a bit thick. For the markings I decided to do them with a pencil and masking tape. If you have a cutting plotter, the world is your oyster for these things. Again, a swiveling blade would be good here. The number 4 was a clear success. The number 2 was too curvy for this, but it's passable. Painted with Tamiya flat white and thin passes so no ridge is created, the numbers are airbrushed. The number 2 needs some reshaping with a toothpick. Also, remember that it needs to be placed right the first time because it cannot be adjusted like decals on the go. I really like how the number 4 came out, the 2 not so much. But again, can be shaped with a toothpick. Here is the second part of the marking. I choose the letter D for dragon, dragoon in English from the ye old times cavalry. Now with the toothpick and water. Time to chip out the base camouflage. As several days has passed, I need warm water and some determination. Also, I will clean up the markings with a sharpened toothpick. Once the mechanical chipping is done, I'll refine it with the brush. The rollers are brush painted with ammo rubber and tires. Chipping finished. The combination of chipping fluid and brushwork gives a lot of depth and variety. Hull and turret are almost done for weathering. Don't forget to weather accessories accordingly. As the main color is olive drab, I chose another shade of it mixed with the French green to get some contrast. Out of laziness, I used a pre-made wash. I forgot to mention that a satin varnish was applied and let it cure before the pin wash. Think of it as a save state for your paintwork before weathering. I let it dry for some days. It helps for the wash to stay on the crevices. With a moistened swab with odorless white spirits, remove the excess. I like this leave-in methods as it quickens this process a lot. On some areas this tool doesn't reach, so switch to a brush or a precision swab. Here we are with the basic work finished. The machine gun needs some TLC. If you want to skip painting the return rollers, you can, as they are very hard to see. Especially if you will add mud and dirt. The tools also need the final touches. Back when I was living in Japan, I went to an art store and got some stuff. In this case, a tube of pigment that comes in grains that need to be grinded a bit, but it works fine. This color is adequate for what I have in mind, so this experiment will be a 2-for-1. Time to weather the Modus. I assume as it's an exposed element that also gets handled a lot, it gives way to interesting wear. The tools get a used look first with a layer of rust, so to say. Then the parts more used in steel color. As always, thin layers and work up the opacity. This also allows to make different wear patterns. Build up the wear to your liking. For the tracks I made a mixture of these two enamel products. The splashes for dry look and texture. And this filter that went bad or something that I use as thinner and fixer as it has some binder in it seems. Of course, the main star is the pigment. These three mix to get this color and consistency. As you can see, it needs to be quite thin to build it like a light layer on the tracks. Clean up the contact areas with a paper towel. Same mixture was applied lightly on the road wheels. Once dried, it can be cleaned up with a makeup sponge. As for the tracks, not a lot can be seen, so focus your materials and efforts on the parts that can be appreciated. For the lower hull, I went for a dusty look with the earlier mixture further diluted down with enamel thinner. If you want a drier look, so to speak, here is where you should stop. I prefer muddy looks, and that's what I'm going for here, so I'll keep going. The good thing of working with pigments is that they behave like real dust and are also very easy to move around. Same mixture as the lower hull, but even more thinned down, and applied sparsely into the lower part of the hull. For the upper hull, I apply the mixture with a small brush, making accumulations on the crevices and areas that looks like accumulate dirt. Use very little of the mixture, better add layers than having to remove and repair. Also, I apply it on the tools and around them. Use several references, the geometry of your subject and common sense to apply the dirt. While the pigment mixture is still wet, use a small square dry brush. Blend all the edges of the stains. I found that killing the hard edges on the lower hull was too much work once dry, so I thought of working them while wet. It also allows you to create on one go different levels of accumulation and create transitions. On flat surfaces, a stabbing motion is better, for curved ones follow the shape and gravity. Basically, create a gradient of dust on the sides and work from there. Gnarly looking, isn't it? It was taking a bit long, so I build up the layers more generously and now time to work. I illustrate 2 approaches on one video, talk about value and quality I offer here. Anyways, when working removing stuff, a makeup sponge dipped in enamel thinner is your best friend. Preferably use dabbing motions, removing a bit of the pigment at a time. It ends up like a pin wash but for dirt in a way. Try to be gentle and don't put too much thinner or pressure, as you can remove way too much. Some days later left to dry and back on it. Now to work the turret. I will focus on the lower part of the ring and the upper surfaces as the crew walks around there. The mixture dried up but can be revived with some enamel thinner. As you can see, it's a very thin mixture. Still, I like to keep it tidy for now and apply it on the lower area only and work it there. Here are mostly areas where the crew walks. Don't worry about the hatch, as it will be cleaned off where the crewman touches more. Black pigment, we recreate the exhaust stains. A dry application with short bristle brush will blend with the earlier dusting and allow us to have more control. Now back to the hull once all is set and dry to blend the dust and remove what we don't want. With the dry brush dry blend, dry the dry pigment. Now say it fast several times. For precision work and hard to reach areas, I used a small old brush that I don't mind wrecking. Same goes for the turret dust. Now time to give some interest to the dust with oils. Here I'll use black oil. and burnt sienna, mixed in with the same mixture I used all this time. Got to say it's been weeks and still works, which is surprising. This mixture is applied to nooks and crannies and areas you want to add some shadow. Now I added more black oil paint to the mix to make the base humid color on the tracks. Please be careful when using pure black in mixes, as it's more powerful than you might think, so better fall short and add color than to have to balance it back to lighter colors. Focus on the middle of the track and their pivot edge, not sure if that's the words for the part where they join the other link. Also, on the lower hull on the innermost edges. While this dries a bit, I'll keep working on the upper parts. Always keep checking around and work things to your liking. Don't forget you can go back to previous mixtures to adjust whatever you want, like here where I'm adding more dust heavily thinned down. Downside of oils and enamel-based stuff is that it takes days or even weeks to fully cure and show their true result. Time to add fuel stains with this ammo product. I think these are the fuel covers, so around them let's make a bit of a mess of field refueling. Speaking of mess, this one also got old or something, as it has a very thick and gloopy texture that doesn't want to blend well at all. Around the engine bay I switch to ammo oil stains and leave some around hatches. On the exhaust I wet blend the oil stains into the black smoke to create a very interesting exhaust stain. Don't forget the road wheel bearing also need lubrication and or present leaks, so give them some attention too. A bit hard to see with the reflections on camera, but here we have the fuel and oil stains done. I will add some on the turret pivot point perhaps, but I'm not sure if that's an access point or not. Time for the wet effects. I will focus on the closed areas. The mixture of the pigment dust and the wet effect liquid gives a satin humid look, which is very interesting to me. If you want wet mud, add more product and perhaps some oil paint to darken the tone. Time for vegetation debris, as I envision it covered with makeshift foliage camouflage with jungle and rice paddy plants. Time to cut some seaball fibers on a container with a bit of clay color pigment. Adding some yellow ink, and some deep green ink in lesser quantity. Mix it all well until you're happy with the color. Now, this mix may seem a bit weird, but I'm experimenting on this, and I think it will work out fine. If not, well, this will never see the light of day. I added a bit of water and let it sit for some hours until it became like this. So, it's less intense the color on the liquid and less clumpy to apply. The inks will add color and function as a fixing medium to the plant debris, I think, if not just add some heavily diluted PVA or diorama glue, as it's acrylic based. The drying time is quite short and I'm very pleased on how it's going. Now for the bigger plants. I got this laser cut paper ones for the low price of €7 for one sheet. It says you can use watercolor pencils on them, but I guess any paint will work. Anyway, I like what I see in the product photographs, so let's get down to business. A bit burned looking on the other side, but I don't think it matters. I never use this kind of product, so I'll stick to instructions for now and start with some watercolor pencils and see how it goes from there. On the wet palette, I created a little selection of acrylics to paint them, several green colors to mix and create more vivid and more dried out plants. I've did some thinking and decided to simply start with acrylic paints to give the color to these leaves, as I didn't fully understand why use watercolor pencils first or in general. I looked up some reference pictures and started with a darker green on the center and mix a drier looking midtone towards the middle. To keep them interesting and realistic, I add other greens to the mixes to give them some variety. The paints are heavily thinned down, but not too much as they wet the paper too much. Find a balance that works out for you, so it doesn't flood them but neither looks like plaster smeared onto them. Paint doesn't seem to bleed too much to the other side, so that will be useful to create interesting plants. I went ahead and finished one leaf to see if this was going somewhere. To unify the undertones, a thin down layer of this green first. Once it dries, I did a layer of intense green ink with a very light consistency applied in sputters randomly. Just push the trigger fast to get this effect. Another layer of thin light green. Once dry, cut off the leaves with the help of a CD or similar surface. To seal them and shape them, use some acrylic varnish, that despite saying matte it dries satin for some reason. While the plant's dry, let's make some mud. I use the plants and add some pigment. The splashes effect will serve as the binder base for this mix. I keep the mixture out of the moving areas like the sprocket holes and similar. For the hull, apply it lightly and apply it like vertical strokes. Also, don't forget to dirty elements that meet the ground like the ad hoc camouflage elements. Keep applying and correcting until you get the results you like. Remember, again, to keep somewhat clear the moving parts. Congratulations if you watched the whole thing, or most of it at least. Hopefully it was instructive or somewhat entertaining. Thanks for watching and see you on the next build.